Regardless of how advanced your business solution is, if you can't present your content in a consumable format, then probably success is not your priority. Now, the problem with presenting content in a consumable format is being able to choose the tool that is able to balance providing the best user experience or the best user consumption experience, while at the same time providing less effort to manage those tools. Now, in this video, I'm going to share the tools I use, which includes Contentful, Next.js, and AWS Amplify to create a content creation and content delivery system. Now, the first thing you need to do is to create a content model, and we can do this with Contentful. Contentful enables you to decouple the content that supports your website from the actual code that runs that website. This means you get a headless CMS that allows you to manage the content for your website and also the media assets without relying on code changes to update this content. Now, make sure you're signed into Contentful, then click on Contentful Model, and then click on Design your Contentful Model. Now, let's give the model a name, click Create, and let's start adding some fields to this model. So click the Add Field button, and let's start with a text field. We're going to call this title. It's going to be a short text exact search, and then we can add and configure. Now, on this next page, you need to do extra configuration like the validation, which I'm not going to stress you about in this video, but just know that you have the option to set up validation on this page. Then click Confirm to continue. Now click the Add Field button again to add one more field, which is going to be of text type as well. It's going to be short text and exact search, just like the title, but this time we're going to call it the slug. Then add and configure, and then confirm. Now click the Add Field button again, but this time we're going to try to add a media field. So click the media type. It's going to be one file at a time, and we can call this post image. Then click Add and configure and confirm as well. And the last field you want to add is a text type as well, but this time it's not going to be a short text exact search. It's going to be a long text full text search field, and it's going to be called the posts body. We can add and configure and then confirm. Now, once we are done adding all of these fields, we can go ahead and click Save to save the content model. All right, now that we have a blueprint for our content, the next step is to actually use that blueprint to add some content to our database. And to do that, click on the content menu, then click Add Entry. Now, the form you can see here, or the form you are seeing at this point, has the same exact field that with the field we created in the content model. So you can see we have the title, the slug, the post image, and the post body, which exactly matches what we've done in the content model. So let's quickly give this post a title. And we can also provide a slug. And we also need to click upload an image. To do that, click the Add Media button, choose Add New Media. Let's call the media banner 1. And let's click the Open File Selector to open the file selector. And then I'm going to grab an image from my computer and drop it on this file uploader. And once it's done uploading, I can click the Publish button to publish the image. And then go back and provide the post body, which is just going to be a test markdown content. And then finally, you can click on Publish to publish the entire content. Now, before we leave the Contentful dashboard and head to our computer to start building out this app, let's do one more thing, which is to grab the credentials for this particular content space so we can access the content we've added to this space. And to do that, click on the Settings menu and click API Keys. Then click Add API Key to add a new API key. And all you need to do is just copy the space ID and the access token to your clipboard. Now, at this point, we have a Contentful model. We've added some content to that model, or with that model rather. And then we've also grabbed our credentials so we can access this content. And the next step is to actually create a next app, which you can then use to consume this content. Now to do that, instead of running npx create next from scratch, I've created a starter template which makes it easier for you to consume this content. Now it has a few configurations set up for you out of the box, things like styling with Tailwind and some components that makes it easy to render Markdown. Now to use this template, all you need to do is run npx digit command to clone this particular repository. Now cd into the new project and run npm install to install the dependencies. Now open the project in a code editor. Now the next thing we need to do is to take care of some configuration in this project. The first one is to set up the credentials we copied in a .env project, and the second one is set up next.js config. So to set up the .env file, we need to create a new file at the root of our project called env.local. And then we can paste our credentials to this particular file. So you can see we have the contentful space ID as well as the contentful access token, which we've copied from contentful. Now the second configuration is to provide our image domain or image root domain to next config. Now here's the thing. Next.js is going to run your app and it's going to try to build your app on a local server, which means that it's going to execute the code and it's going to try to visit a URL. And that right there is going to expose you to some vulnerable attacks if Next.js is not aware that you trust these images. So providing the domain or the root domain for your images is a way of you to tell, is just you telling Next.js, hey, it's okay for you to back off because I know exactly what I'm doing by accessing the images from this particular domain or from this particular URL. So that said, open Next.js or nextconfig.js, and we just need to provide the root domain where our images are coming from, which is the contentful domain. And once we've done that, we can open the terminal and run npm run dev to open this project in the browser, or to run this project locally and open it in the browser. Now, when you head back to the browser and open this project, you can see we get a very simple page with the home page, and we also have a slug page, which just shows the string post, the hard-coded string post. Now, the remainder of this video is just going to be us trying to fill out these pages with actual content that is coming from our Contentful API. All right, now all of our step processes or setup process is complete. And the next thing we need to do, or subsequently everything we're going to do now, is all about just consuming this API or this Contentful API with Contentful library in our Next.js. Hence, we end up rendering all of the content we have in our Contentful database on the user screen. So that said, the first thing we need to do is to actually fetch the list of posts. Now to do that, open the home page and import create client. Then we can then call create client to create a contentful client, and we can configure this client using the space ID and the access token. And once we've configured this client, we can use this client to then fetch a list of entries from our API. Now, this get entries method is going to return a promise, so we need to add async to this function. And then finally, we can get a list of posts from these entries. Now, once we have a list of posts, the next thing we need to do is to try to render them. So let's replace this boring home text with an actual wrapper for this page. And inside this wrapper, we're going to create a grid item for laying out the post items. Now, so once we have the grid item, we can then try to loop through each of these post items. For each post, I want to render the post card component, which I'm going to import in a second. But this post card component is going to have an ID. It's also going to have a key. We need to set the slug as well. And for this slug, I'm concatenating the actual slug value and the ID because the slug value has a tendency of having duplicates. So appending the ID to it is just going to ensure that we don't end up with duplicates. Then we need to set the title and also set the date that this content was created at. And finally, we need to set the image URL. Now, once we have all of this set, we can then go ahead and import our postcard component. And before we test this, let's add a title to this page. So let's use the post title component, which I can also import from the posts component to give a title to this page. And once we've done all of this, we can head back to the browser and ensure that we have an actual post item rendered to the page. Now, what happens when you click on read full article is that it's going to take us to that slug page which we're yet to actually create, and that's the next thing we need to do. But before we do that, I need to change the title of this page from just being a boring localhost text to being the actual title of this particular content item. Or rather, in this case, since this is the home page, to just being the actual title for this page, which is going to just be my blog post. Now, before we actually work on this page, I need to go back to the home page and update the title of this page from just showing the localhost text to being the actual title of this particular home page. Now, fortunately, Next.js makes this easy. So all we need to do is export a metadata object from a particular page, in this case, our home page. And inside this object, we can then define the title for this page, and we can optionally define the description. Now, if I save this page and head back to the browser, you can see that the title of this page has changed from just being localhost 3000 to being the actual text that was provided as the title of the page. All right, now that we have a list of posts, we need to be able to read each of these posts when we click the read full article link. So to do that, let's work on this page. So head back to the code editor and open the slug page. Now, just like we did for the previous page, we need to configure Contentful. And to do that, let's start with importing create client. And after we've imported create client, just like we did previously, I'm going to call it to create a client. I'm going to supply the space ID as well as the access token. So now that we've created a client, let's call a fetch post function, which we're going to create in a second. But this function is going to return a promise. So let's stick async in front of the post function. And the next step is to actually create this fetch post function. And to do that, we need to just go below the post component and create a fetch post function, which is going to take a params object, which of course we can get from the post component, and then we can forward it to the function. Then the next thing the function does is to call getID from slug, which we'll create in a second, and it passes it the slug. And remember, what we're doing this because we've concatenated the slug and the ID, so we can then grab that ID from the slug. And once we've done that, we can then call getEntry using the client, and whatever ID is passed to it is going to be used to fetch a particular post, and then we'll return that post. Then let's go ahead and create the getID from slug function, which is just going to split the slug and grab the second portion of the slug that contains the ID. Now, once you have all of this, we can then use the post that we fetched to render the post component or to render a post item. So that said, let's replace our boring text with a wrapper. And inside this wrapper, we can render the post title, which we can quickly import. Now, once we've rendered the post title, we also need to render a link. And this link is going to take us back to the home page when the user clicks the link. And we also need to import the link component from Next.js. And the next thing we need to render is the actual post image, which you also need the image component from Next to render. And then lastly, we can render the post body, which you also need to import as well. If we head back to the browser and click read full article, you should be able to see the full content that we've just rendered. And if you scroll down, you can see we have everything looking how we'd expect it to look like. Now, if you head back to the browser, you can see that we in fact have our content item and the full content rendered to the page. Now, one thing we need to take care of, just like we did in the previous page, was to change the title from just being this hard-coded, or not hard-coded, but the actual URL to the actual post or the actual page title. And to do this, previously, for the previous page, we exported the metadata object. Unfortunately, we can't do that for a dynamic page because Next.js is not aware of the actual title that is going to be on this page until the page has been fetched, until the content of that page has been fetched. So instead, what Next allows you to do is to instead export a generate metadata function. And this function is where you can then make a fetch request to get the item you want to be the metadata object, or you want to return as the metadata object. So to do this, we need to call fetch post one more time, just like we did inside the component. And don't worry about us calling this twice, because with Next.js caching mechanism, we are assured that if this has been fetched the first time, it won't be fetched subsequently, since there is no need to do that. Now we need to grab params from this function and forward it to fetch post. Then finally, we can export an object that contains the title. Now if we head back to the browser, you should see that our title has now changed from being the localhost URL to being the actual title of this page. Alright, now that we've completed the app, the next thing we need to do is push it to AWS Amplify so that it can be available publicly. And before we can deploy this app, we need to push it to a repository so we can set up continuous delivery from that repository to Amplify. So to push it to a repository, we can do this from Visual Studio Code, but whatever you do, whatever works for you is fine. So let's publish to GitHub and set up a private repository. And once it's done pushing to GitHub, we can open the browser and search, or head to AWS console, then search for AWS Amplify. Now open it. And once it's open, click on the new app drop down and click host web app. Now we'll need to get our code from GitHub, so select GitHub or whatever provider you've chosen, then click continue. Now once you've pushed to GitHub, head to the AWS console and search for AWS Amplify. And when you find it, open it. Then click on the new app drop down and choose host web app. Now select your Git provider and click continue. Now select the repository that we've just pushed, leave the branch as main and click next. Now before we deploy, we need to provide the environmental variable that we've set up locally to our build settings. So click on advanced settings, then set the key, then set the space ID key and provide the space ID value, and also set the access token and provide the access token. Now once you've done this, before we can actually start the deployment process, we need to set the build settings to explicitly tell Amplify to copy these environmental variables to the build environment. And to do that, click the edit button, and just before the run command, we're going to provide the actual command, which is going to first of all print the environmental variable to our console, and then we can grab the space ID and access token and then add it to a .env.production file. Now click save, and then we can go ahead and proceed to saving and deploying this app to AWS Amplify. Now this process is going to take a few minutes, so what we're going to do is give Amplify a few seconds or minutes rather to deploy this, and once it's done, we can jump back in and take a look at the production URL. Alright, so the deployment is done, and we can click the production URL to take a look at what it looks like. So you can see we get exactly the same thing we saw on the local environment, and if I click on read full article, we still get our full content available and in a public URL. Alright, so before we end this video, I have one more tip to show you, and it's going to improve your workflow with updating the content that you've written in Contentful, and basically going to allow you to avoid the process of trying to rebuild your site because your content have changed and you want to pick up those changes, or you want to rebuild the content site and pick up those changes. And to do this, what we can do is, if you head back to Contentful, let's refresh. All right, one last thing before we close out this video, and that's a very handy trick that's going to make it easier for you to update the content, or rather to redeploy the changes you've made when you update your content from Contentful, so you don't have to manually rebuild the site just to pick up those changes. And to do this, or to demonstrate this problem, if we take a look at our Contentful content or our entry, if you open it and let's say we add a change here, and if you click publish changes, there is no way for already built app on Amplify to pick up these changes because it's statically generated. So you have to manually rebuild your Amplify project for those changes to be picked up and deployed. The cool thing and the good news is that we can actually pick up these changes directly from Contentful, or we can tell Amplify about these changes directly from Contentful, and we can do this by adding an extra button to this sidebar that says build now. And what's going to happen when you click that button is that Amplify is going to get triggered to rebuild that site. So to add this button, what we need to do is go to apps and go to marketplace, and we can search for AWS Amplify, so we can install this plugin. Now click install and click authorize access. Now to give Contentful access to your Amplify app, we have to head back to Amplify, open the app we've just deployed, go to build settings, scroll down to incoming webhooks and click create webhook. You can just call it Contentful and then click save. Now copy the webhook URL, head back to Amplify, or to Contentful rather, then paste the URL and click install. Now once you've installed this plugin, if you head back to your content entry, you won't still find the button, so we'll have to explicitly tell Contentful to add this button. And to do this, click on content model, click on the post model, then click on sidebar, then add the AWS Amplify plugin to the sidebar, and then click save. Now head back to the content menu, click on the entry, and let's say I change the title to include a text that says update. Now you can see we have this button to build now, but before we can build now, we need to publish the changes I've made. And after publishing, I can then go ahead and click build now to start rebuilding this website. Now you can see we have a message that this build have started successfully. So if you go back to Amplify console, you can see that we've gone back to restart this build, and its new stage is now the provisioning stage. So just like we did previously, we're going to give it a few seconds or a few minutes, and once it's done deploying, we can come back and confirm that the changes we made in Contentful are now being reflected on this build or on this new build. All right, now the build is successful, and if we head back to the production URL, you can see that the title now contains the update we added at the end of the title. And there you have it. That's my complete process for building a content website. I hope you found this useful. See you in the next video. Goodbye.